The morning light filtered through the high glass windows of the Ashworth estate, spilling across marble floors polished to a gleam. Every surface in the mansion spoke of wealth. Crystal vases, standing tall on mahogany tables, chandeliers dripping with golden light, velvet drapes drawn just enough to let the world see, but never truly enter. And yet, despite its grandeur, the house felt hollow. It was a palace stripped of warmth, echoing with silence broken only by the ticking of an antique clock in the study. In the center of that study stood the safe, its heavy steel door left wide open, like a wound, its contents carelessly exposed. Stacks of $100 bills sat in precise bricks, wrapped with paper bands that spoke of banks and vaults. Beside them, ropes of diamonds glinted under the light, each stone catching fire as if mocking the silence. A necklace once bought for a woman who had left him, a watch taken back from a man who betrayed him. Even gold coins polished by the hands of dealers who swore loyalty only to profit. Everything inside that safe carried a history of mistrust. It wasn't just money in that vault. It was proof of Alexander Ashworth's life, a ledger of victories stolen and losses endured. He stood just beyond the hallway arch, hidden in shadow, the scent of polished wood and old paper around him. His tall frame was rigid, his jaw locked tight, his dark suit blending into the dim light, his eyes, sharp and cold, fixed on the doorway as though waiting for a ghost to pass through. But it wasn't a ghost he was expecting. It was her, Camila, Alexander's. Mind burned with memories that refused to fade. His ex-wife's laugh as she signed the divorce papers and took millions with her. The sting of betrayal from partners he had once called brothers, who siphoned profits until his empire nearly collapsed. Employees he had trusted with contracts, only to learn they had pocketed what wasn't theirs. Each face blurred together now into one truth. People took when they thought no one was watching. They always did. And Alexander, though surrounded by wealth, had come to believe that trust was nothing but a fool's currency dot, and yet Camila troubled him. For 7 months she had moved through his estate, with quiet precision, her hands steady, her eyes lowered, her voice never raised above what was required. She never lingered, she never flattered. Her record was spotless, her background check painfully clean, and that was what unsettled him most. He could not see the angle, he could not find the flaw. Honesty so plain, so consistent it felt unnatural. Too good, too dangerous dots, so he designed this test. Cruel, calculated, and cold. He had ordered the cameras in the hallway disabled. He had instructed his security staff to step back, to say nothing. This moment would exist for only 2 souls, the one tempted and the one watching. No excuses, no explanations, only truth. His hand brushed the wall as he leaned closer to the arch, the cool marble grounding him. His heart did not beat with anger, nor with fear, but with a strange anticipation, sharp as the pause before a storm. He wanted to be right. He wanted her to fail, if only to prove that his cynicism was justified. And yet, buried deep beneath the stone walls of his heart, another part of him when he had buried years ago hoped desperately to be wrong. This time, he murmured to himself, the words sinking into the hush of the mansion, there will be no excuses, no cameras, no witnesses, just her and the truth. The safe stood open, gleaming like temptation itself, and Alexander waited in the silence for footsteps he knew would come. The clock in the study struck 8:30, its chime rolling softly across the wide corridors of the Ashworth estate. Dust motes swirled lazily in the pale morning light, glimmering like ghosts above the polished floors. Alexander stood hidden in the shadow of the archway, still as the carved stone columns that lined the hall. His breath was controlled, his gaze sharp, every nerve in his body straining toward the door. He knew the routine. He had memorized it. At precisely 8:42, she would arrive. She was never late. Camila. The name floated through his mind with a weight that unsettled him. She had become more than just an employee in the past 7 months. Not in action she was quiet, reserved, almost invisible, but in presence, there was something about the way she carried herself, moving through pain without complaint, like a woman trained by hardship to leave no trace of her own suffering. She arrived before dawn each day, hair tied back, eyes steady, and began her duties with the precision of someone who knew time itself could not be wasted. And yet, Alexander had studied her more than he admitted, not just with the suspicion of a wealthy man guarding his estate, but with the haunted curiosity of someone who wanted to understand why she was different. She had no debts on record, no history of theft, no shadow of scandal. The world had taken much from her husband lost too young, to daughters to raise alone. A mother slipping slowly into illness, but she never asked for help, never even hinted at pity. She moved like someone who refused to believe the world owed her anything. It made Alexander uneasy, because if she was truly as honest as she seemed, then everything he believed about human nature might crumble. And Alexander Ashworth could not afford to believe in illusions again. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway. He stiffened. His pulse picked up, not with fear, but with the strange thrill of anticipation, a predator waiting to see if his prey would step into the trap. His fingers curled at his side, nails pressing into his palm. Then she appeared. Camila walked with her usual measured pace, carrying a small feathered duster and a folded rag tucked into her apron. Her uniform, simple and crisp, looked out of place against the grandeur of the estate, as though she belonged to another world entirely. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, though the faint shadows beneath her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She stepped into the study. The sunlight struck the steel of the open safe, casting a glint across the floor. Her eyes caught it instantly. She froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. The feathered duster stilled in her hand. For a heartbeat, the room was suspended in silence. The air thick with tension, Alexander leaned forward, his body tight, his eyes narrowed to slits. This was the moment he had orchestrated, the exact instant of truth. Her gaze lingered on the safe. The stacks of bills looked almost unreal in the golden light, the ropes of diamonds winking like they were alive, a fortune within reach. One hand could change her life, erase her debts, heal her mother, feed her daughters. Alexander knew the weight of that temptation. He had seen stronger people crumble for less. She took a slow step closer, then another. Alexander's chest tightened. His mind whispered, "Yes, this is it. Now you will see what she truly is. Now she will show you the truth no background check could reveal." But instead of reaching inside, Camila did something that stopped his breath. She pulled the folded rag from her apron, knelt slightly, and began wiping the edge of the steel door. With careful strokes, her movements were steady, almost reverent, as though the open safe were nothing more than another surface collecting dust. She didn't touch the stacks of money. She didn't linger over the jewels. She polished the steel with the same attention she gave the stair railings, the doorknobs, the countless forgotten corners of the mansion. Alexander's throat went dry. He blinked once, slowly, unable to process the simplicity of her act, and then something stranger. Dossier Mila paused, her hand trembling just slightly. She reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out a small, worn photograph. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases as though it were more precious than any jewel in the safe. Two little girls smiled back from the paper, their hair tied in matching ribbons, their cheeks pressed close. Behind them, a hospital bed framed an older woman, thin and weak, but smiling with quiet strength. Camilla's lips moved, whispering something so faint it never reached Alexander's ears. A prayer, a promise, perhaps both. She placed the photograph gently on the shelf beside the money, gazing at it with eyes that carried the weight of sacrifice and love. Then, after a moment, she lifted it again, pressed her lips to the paper, and tucked it back against her heart. Her hand closed the safe door with a soft metallic click. Alexander staggered back a step, his heart pounding so hard it felt foreign in his chest. He had expected greed, or at least hesitation, but not this, not love, not restraint, not a quiet act of integrity so strong it pierced straight through the walls he had built around his soul. Hidden in the shadows, Alexander Ashworth, millionaire, cynic, man betrayed 100 times, felt something warm sting his eyes. He turned quickly before she could see him, pressing a hand against the cool marble of the hall. He walked away in silence, carrying a truth heavier than gold. Night had fallen over the Ashworth estate like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating. The chandeliers no longer burned with light. The echo of footsteps had long faded, and the mansion stood in silence, a palace of shadows. In his room at the far end of the east wing, Alexander Ashworth lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the carved ceiling, the safe, the open door, the untouched stacks of cash that haunted him, every image replaying in his mind with unbearable clarity. He turned to his side, then his back, then sat up, restless. The sheets twisted around him like restraints. He had designed the trap to confirm what he already believed, that everyone, given the chance, would take that every hand eventually reached for what it shouldn't, that integrity was a lie. But what Camila had done, it broke his logic. She had touched nothing. She hadn't even lingered. She had only polished the edge of the steel, as though her duty mattered more than her desperation. And then the photo, that small folded photograph burned in his thoughts, the two smiling girls, the frail woman on the bed, Camila's lips pressing gently against the paper. He had seen reverence, not greed, love, not hunger, restraint, not weakness, and it shook him more deeply than betrayal ever had. Alexander rose from the bed and crossed to the tall window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like scattered jewels. Once, he had believed that all belonged to him, every deal, every contract, every empire built with iron resolve and ruthless precision. But beneath all of it ran a river of suspicion. He trusted no one, loved no one, and kept company only with silence. Wealth had insulated him, but it had also imprisoned him, building walls that grew higher with each betrayal. Now, in the stillness of the night, the walls felt less like protection and more like chains. His mind would not let him rest. He remembered his ex-wife's final words before she left. "You only know how to count money, Alexander, not people." He remembered the sting of signing checks to former partners who had stolen from him, the hollow laughter of friends who used him until he had nothing left to give. Each scar had shaped him into the man who stood before the window now, a man who expected dishonesty because it was easier than being disappointed again. But Camila's act was different. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, unseen, and therefore more powerful. If she had stolen, he would have been vindicated, confirmed in his view of humanity. Instead, she had given him something far more dangerous. At 3 a.m, he descended into the study, unable to resist the pull of the room. The safe was closed now, locked as it should be. He placed a hand on its steel surface, cool under his palm, and felt the weight of it. All his wealth, all his jewels, all the evidence of a life built on distrust, it all felt hollow in comparison to that single photograph. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the burn of tears he could not stop. "What do I do with this?" he whispered into the darkness. The mansion gave no answer. By dawn, when the sun bled into the sky, Alexander sat at his desk, pen in hand, a blank sheet before him. His handwriting, sharp and deliberate, etched words he had never thought he'd write. "Integrity is priceless, but so is peace. You've given me both." He paused, staring at the paper, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Was it guilt? Gratitude? Hope? He didn't know. All he knew was that he needed to do something before the weight of what he had witnessed crushed him completely. He slid aside, blank check into the envelope with the note, sealed it, and placed it where Camila would find it in the morning. His hand lingered on it as if afraid to let go. This was not payment. It was not reward. It was surrender and acknowledgement that not all people were thieves, and that sometimes the greatest treasures were not kept in safes, but in hearts that chose to do right when no one was watching. And yet, even as he rose from the desk, a shadow of doubt still clung to him. Would she accept it? Would she believe it? Or would she see this gesture as another kind of test? The suspense twisted in his chest like a knife. He had left the safe open to uncover the truth. Now he was leaving his own heart open, and the risk felt infinitely greater. By the time the clock struck 7, Alexander had not slept. He sat in the hallway, listening for footsteps he knew by heart, waiting for the sound of Camila's arrival. The trap was over, but the true test, the one he never planned for, was only just beginning. The morning broke with a pale, golden light spilling through the tall windows of the Ashworth estate. Outside, the gardens glistened with dew, roses bending under the weight of the early mist. Inside, silence reigned, heavy and expectant. The clock in the study ticked steadily, each second echoing louder than it should have. In the kitchen, the envelope sat on the counter where Alexander had placed it before dawn, its cream paper catching the sunlight like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Camila entered the estate just as she always did, quietly, without flourish, with the precision of someone who had no time to waste. Her hair was tied back into a neat bun, her uniform freshly pressed though frayed at the seams. She carried the same small bag she had carried every morning for months, the same tired but dignified expression. To anyone else, it was a day like any other, but not to Alexander. Hidden in the upper hallway, he watched her descend the stairs, his heart drumming faster than it should. For years he had observed people through the eyes of suspicion, but this was different. He wasn't waiting for her to betray him this time, he was waiting to see if she would accept his truth. He had opened the safe to test her integrity. Now he had opened his heart in that letter, and in some strange way, this felt far more dangerous. Camila moved to the kitchen, setting down her bag, rolling up her sleeves. Her eyes fell on the envelope resting on the counter. She frowned. It was unusual for Alexander to leave anything out of place, let alone something so personal looking. Her name was written across the front in elegant, heavy script. She picked it up carefully, as though the paper itself might break. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The sound of paper tearing felt impossibly loud in the quiet kitchen. She unfolded the letter and read. Integrity is priceless, but so is peace. You've given me both. Your daughters and your mother deserve a life without fear. Please accept the enclosed without guilt. It's not a reward. It's a thank you. The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the paper against her chest, unable to breathe. For a moment, she forgot the world around her, the ticking clock, the marble floors, the suffocating weight of the mansion's silence. All she could feel was release. Like a rope that had been tightening around her neck for years was finally cut. Her hands shook as she noticed the check tucked behind the note. She slid it out, her breath catching when she saw the signature. Alexander Ashworth, blank. No amount written, no restrictions, just a name that carried the weight of more wealth than she could imagine. Her knees weakened, and she dropped into the nearest chair, the letter clutched to her chest. The check lying limply on the table. Tears streamed silently down her face. She thought of her daughter's shoes, worn thin with holes at the toes. She thought of the unpaid medical bills stacked on her nightstand, the eviction notices shoved into drawers, the hopeless calculation she had done over and over at her kitchen table, until numbers blurred into despair. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life where survival wasn't the only goal, a life where her daughters could dream without fear, where her mother could receive treatment without the constant shadow of debt. Alexander, watching from above, felt his chest tighten with something he hadn't experienced in decades. Guilt, yes, but also awe. The way she clutched that letter as though it were not money, but salvation itself made his own. Wealth felt both small and powerful all at once. He had built walls to protect himself from betrayal, but in doing so, he had starved himself of moments like this, moments of raw humanity that no vault could contain. But beneath the wave of emotion, a seed of fear remained. Would she think this was charity, a bribe? Would she resent him for assuming she needed saving? He didn't want her gratitude if it was forced. He didn't want her tears if they were born of humiliation. More than anything, he didn't want to be seen as another man holding power over her. Camila wiped her face with the back of her hand. Drawing in a shaky breath, she folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease with trembling fingers, then placed it back into the envelope. The check remained on the table. She stared at it for a long time, her lips moving silently, as though debating with herself. Her daughters' faces flashed before her eyes, her mother's smile, the years of struggle, and finally, the memory of the safe, the temptation she had walked away from. This isn't theft, she whispered to herself, her voice fragile but steady. This is trust, and I can't betray that. She slipped the check back into the envelope, holding it against her heart. Upstairs, Alexander turned away, pressing his forehead to the wall, his eyes wet. He had not expected her to cry. He had not expected her to touch the letter as if it were sacred. And he certainly hadn't expected that by giving her peace, he would find a piece of his own heart breaking open. For the first time in years, Alexander Ashworth realized the true weight of wealth wasn't in how much he could hoard, but in how much he could give. The weekend came, and with it a strange nervousness Alexander Ashworth had never known before. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, stood before roaring shareholders, and dismantled rival empires with a single phone call, it should have been nothing to drive across town to a modest neighborhood. Yet his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should as he guided the black car through narrow streets lined with worn fences and weathered porches. The Ashworth estate was a world of marble and chandeliers. Here, laundry fluttered on ropes between cracked balconies, and children played barefoot on sidewalks with chalk-stained hands. He had asked his driver to stay behind. This visit was a business. It wasn't a transaction. It was something more fragile, something he couldn't yet name. He carried no entourage, no suit jacket, only a folder under his arm and a heart unsettled by truths he couldn't ignore. Camila's home stood at the end of a quiet street, a small single-story house with faded blue paint peeling from its siding. A crooked wooden step creaked under his foot as he approached. He paused, the weight of hesitation pressing into him. Would she resent him for showing up here, intruding into her private world? Would his presence feel like charity dressed as friendship? The door opened before he could knock. Two little girls stared up at him with wide brown eyes, their faces mirrors of the photograph he had seen in the safe. One had ribbons in her hair, fraying at the edges. The other clutched a stuffed bear so worn its button dangled by a thread. "Are you Mr. Ashworth?" the older one asked softly, her voice careful, polite, as though she'd been raised to treat strangers with respect. Even when life had given her little reason to, Alexander nodded, suddenly unable to find his voice. Before he could speak, Camila appeared behind them, wiping her hands on a faded apron. For the briefest moment, shock crossed her face, quickly replaced by composure. "Mr. Ashworth," she said quietly, her tone both surprised and guarded. "I didn't expect." "I know," he interrupted gently, almost awkwardly. May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside, motioning him into the narrow hallway. The house smelled of fresh bread and soap, humble and warm. The furniture was simple, worn but clean. Family photographs hung on the walls, her daughters laughing, her mother smiling faintly from a hospital bed. Moments captured on paper, because luxuries like canvases and frames were out of reach. Alexander lowered himself into a wooden chair at the small kitchen table, so different from the vast polished one in his estate. The chair creaked under his weight, but for once he did not mind. The girls hovered near him, whispering to each other, their eyes curious but unafraid. "I brought this," Alexander said finally, setting the folder on the table. His hands, steady in boardrooms, trembled slightly as he slid it toward her. "It contains documents, arrangements for a new home in a safer neighborhood. Ownership transferred directly to you, and an employment contract head of domestic operations. Full benefits, flexible hours. I know you care for your mother. This will give you space." Camila's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes flicked from the folder to her daughters, then back to him. Her hands hovered over the papers as if afraid they might vanish if she touched them. "I don't understand," she whispered. Why are you doing this?" Alexander looked at her, and in that moment, the mask of the unshakable millionaire cracked. He saw the lines of exhaustion on her face, the quiet strength that had carried her through years of sacrifice. He thought of the safe, the photograph, the kiss pressed against worn paper instead of stolen bills. "Because you reminded me," he said, his voice low and unsteady, "that not everyone takes. That some people still choose love over greed, even when no one is watching. I built my life on suspicion, on believing the worst of people. You proved me wrong, and I don't know if you realize what that means." Camila pressed her hand to her mouth, tears brimming. The little girls ran to her side, clutching at her apron. Her youngest looked up at Alexander with innocent boldness. "Are you going to help Mommy now?" she asked. The words pierced him deeper than any accusation could. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "Yes, I am, if you'll let me, for the first time." Camila's composure faltered completely. She sank into the chair opposite him, her shoulders shaking, tears spilling freely, years of silent endurance, cracked under the weight of unexpected kindness. She wept not for the money, not for the house, not even for the benefits, but for the rare gift of being seen. Truly seen. Alexander reached across the table, his hand hovering awkwardly before resting gently atop the folder. He didn't touch hers, he couldn't presume that, but the gesture carried the weight of trust. For a man who had hidden his heart behind steel and suspicion, it was as vulnerable as bearing his soul outside. The children's laughter drifted faintly from the street. Inside, a new sound filled the little blue house, the quiet, unspoken promise of two worlds colliding, one of wealth and distrust, the other of struggle and integrity. And in that fragile space, something began to grow. Alexander Ashworth, who had once believed himself untouchable, felt the strange sting of tears once more. And for the first time in decades, he did not fight them. The days that followed were unlike anything Alexander Ashworth had experienced in years. Each morning, he found himself waking earlier, his mind no longer racing with numbers, contracts, and betrayals, but with thoughts of Camila's little blue house and the faces he had seen there. For so long, his mansion had been a fortress of marble and silence. Now it seemed unbearably empty, echoing with a hollowness he could no longer ignore. He began visiting her home more often, never announced, always careful, always humble. At first, Camila was cautious, her guard still raised. To her, men like Alexander belonged to another world, the world that crushed people like her, without even noticing. But he didn't arrive with commands or conditions. He brought groceries once, fresh fruit and meat. Her daughter squealed over. Another time, he brought books, worn leather-bound volumes from his own library, gifting them to the girls as if they were treasure. It was the way he sat at her wooden table that startled her most. This was a man who had dined under chandeliers, worth more than her entire house, yet here he was sipping coffee from a chipped mug, listening intently as her mother spoke about treatments and fatigue. He did not interrupt. He did not dismiss. He listened. But beneath the calm surface of these visits, Alexander carried a storm. Each night when he returned to his estate, the walls seemed to close in on him. The safe in the study mocked him, a monument to his mistrust. He found himself staring at it longer each evening, remembering the image of Camila closing it untouched, her photograph pressed against her chest. It unsettled him, not because she had resisted temptation, but because she had revealed to him a world richer than his own, a world where love and sacrifice weighed more than money. The suspense built within him quietly, relentlessly. He had built his life on testing markets, testing contracts, testing people, and every test had cost him. The cruel one he had designed for Camila had shaken him to his core. But now a new test lingered in his mind, one that terrified him. Could he, Alexander Ashworth, risk lowering his walls and allowing trust to exist again? One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, Alexander returned to the Blue House with something different. Not papers, not gifts, not promises. He came alone, empty-handed, his suit jacket left behind. The children greeted him with excitement, tugging at his sleeves, pulling him toward the table. Camila watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, deep and steady, seemed to hold the same question he asked himself. Why are you here? Really? They ate together that night. Simple food, bread, soup, vegetables, but to Alexander, it felt like a feast. Laughter filled the room when the youngest spilled water and he, awkward and out of practice, helped mop it up with the wrong end of the towel. For the first time in years, he laughed with them, a real laugh, uncalculated, unguarded. The sound startled even him later when the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet again. Alexander sat across from Camila. The only light came from a small lamp, casting their shadows long across the walls, his hands clasped together, tight, as though holding something fragile. You need to know the truth, he said at last, his voice low. Camila's brow furrowed. The truth about what? His heart pounded. He could hear the clock ticking, the sound of his own breath, the safe, the open vault. The camera he had ordered disabled. It all rose like a ghost. Between them, he had given her the letter, the house, the position, but he had not confessed the cruel foundation of it all. I left the safe open. He admitted, each word heavy, on purpose. It was a trap. I wanted to see if you would take it. I thought I was protecting myself. I've been betrayed so many times that I stopped believing anyone could be honest. I wanted you to fail, Camila. I wanted to be proven right. The silence that followed was suffocating. Camila's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly. She sat back, her hands curling in her lap, her breathing shallow. For the first time since he had known her, Alexander was afraid not of betrayal, not of loss, but of losing the fragile bond they had built. Her gaze dropped to the table, then lifted back to him, steady, sharp. You tested me like a thief, she said softly. Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of hurt, deep and raw. And when I didn't fail, you gave me more than I ever imagined. Why? Guilt? Alexander shook his head, his throat tight. Not guilt. Gratitude. You didn't just pass a test, Camila. You shattered the walls I've lived behind for decades. When you put that photo in the safe, when you kissed it instead of reaching for the money, I realized how wrong I've been about people, about life. You reminded me of something I had lost. His voice broke slightly. Faith. Her eyes softened, but her silence pressed against him like judgment. The suspense was unbearable. Would she forgive him? Or had he ruined everything by confessing finally? Camila spoke. Wealth doesn't give you the right to test the dignity of others. Mr. Ashworth, you saw me as a temptation, not a person. But I'll tell you why I didn't take anything. Because my daughters are watching me, always. Because my mother taught me that our choices, even unseen, shape the world we leave behind. I didn't resist for you. I resisted for them, her. Words cut him, but they also healed. He bowed his head, ashamed, yet strangely relieved for once. The truth was no longer hidden between them. Camila stood, walking to the kitchen counter where the envelope still lay from days before. She touched it gently, then turned back to him. If you really want to help me, don't make me prove my worth. Trust me without traps, believe in me without tests. Alexander rose slowly, meeting her gaze. His chest ached with the weight of her demand, but in it he saw the final piece of the puzzle. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about power. It was about trust freely given, not forced. And for the first time, he was ready. The night after his confession, Alexander Ashworth did not return to his mansion. He sat in his car outside Camila's little blue house long after the lights inside had gone dark. His heart felt heavier than the steel door of his vault, yet lighter than it had in years, for the first time in decades. He had spoken truth without hiding behind contracts or numbers. But the question gnawed at him like a blade. Had he destroyed what fragile trust he had built with Camila by admitting to the trap? Or had he freed both of them by bringing the lie into the open? When dawn finally broke, the city seemed alive, in a way he had not noticed before. He returned to his estate, walking through its vast, echoing halls. The marble glistened, the chandeliers sparkled, the safe stood silent in the study. But none of it mattered. It all felt empty compared to the warmth of the small house, where the little girls had hugged their mother, where laughter had spilled like music, where humanity lived in simplicity. For days, Alexander wrestled with silence. He visited no one. He attended no meetings. He refused calls. His staff whispered of his strange absence. But he cared nothing for their speculation. All that mattered was the choice before him: continue living locked inside suspicion, or risk everything by tearing down his walls and stepping into a world he could neither control nor predict. On the fifth day, he returned to Camila's home. He carried nothing, no folder, no check, no promises, only himself. She opened the door, her face calm but unreadable. Her daughters peeked from behind her legs, their curious eyes wide. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lower, humbler than before. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled faintly of bread and lavender soap. The kitchen table was cleared, the lamp casting a warm glow over the wooden surface. Camila motioned for him to sit. He sat, but his hands did not rest. They clenched, unclenched, trembled. Slightly, he looked at her, at the strength carved into her face, the exhaustion that never dimmed her dignity, and knew what he had to say. "Camila," he began, his voice rough with the weight of years. "I've spent my life building walls. Walls of steel, walls of wealth, walls of mistrust. They've kept me safe, but they've also kept me empty. When I set that trap for you, I thought I was proving the truth I had lived by, that everyone can be bought, that everyone will take if given the chance. But you," he paused, his throat tightening, "you closed the safe, and in doing so, you opened something to me I thought was long dead. You gave me back the belief that honesty exists, that love exists, that integrity doesn't need witnesses." Camila's eyes glistened, but she stayed silent, listening. "I cannot undo the cruelty of that test," Alexander continued, "but I can choose what I do with what I've learned. And I choose to trust you, not because you passed my trap, but because you showed me something I didn't deserve to see. You reminded me that the richest vault isn't one filled with gold, it's a heart that stays true even in silence." The room was so quiet he could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second a hammer against his chest. Camila leaned back, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze was steady, sharp, yet softened by something he couldn't name. "You think trust is something you give once and it's finished," she said softly. "It isn't. It's something you live every day, in small choices. You tested me with money, but life will test you with power, with loneliness, with fear. If you want to prove you can trust again, Mr. Ashworth, it won't be with me. It will be with yourself." Her words struck deeper than any accusation. He felt his throat close, his chest tighten. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I understand." He whispered, "But I want you to know this: if ever you or your family need me, I am not your employer. I am not your benefactor. I am simply here, not with contracts, not with conditions, just here." Her daughters, who had been listening quietly, suddenly ran forward. The youngest, clutching her threadbare bear, climbed onto his lap without hesitation. The older one leaned against his arm. "Does this mean you're part of our family now?" the little one asked innocently. Alexander's composure shattered. Tears filled his eyes and spilled freely down his cheeks. He had thought himself incapable of such vulnerability, but here he was, undone by the simple honesty of a child. He pulled them close, his chest heaving with a grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, and with a hope he had believed forever lost. Camila watched, her eyes wet, her hand covering her mouth. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't just giving them his trust. He was begging for theirs. And for the first time, she allowed herself to give it. The safe in the mansion remained closed from that day forward, not because Alexander needed to protect what was inside, but because he finally understood the truth. The greatest treasures of his life were not hidden behind steel. They were found in a little blue house, at a wooden table, in the laughter of children, and in the quiet strength of a woman who had shown him that integrity could heal even the deepest wounds. And so the man who had once lived behind marble walls and suspicion found himself in tears, not of loss, but of a life returned.